Welcome to The Voice of Retail. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc. This podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada. Welcome to a special holiday episode of the podcast, a pickup of my Conversations with CommerceNext podcast featuring Canadian retail executive Carolyn Pollock, CMO of Tailored Brands. A veteran big brand and retail marketer leading her team across North America, here in Canada with Moores, helping consumers love the way they look and feel for their most important moments. Carolyn takes us through her eclectic background of international business, packaged goods, and now mastering the art and science of modern marketing and modern marketers.
So Carolyn, why don't we start off having you introduce yourself in your current role at Tailored Brands, just help everyone get grounded in what you're doing there.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm the Chief Marketing Officer for Tailored Brands. We, as you mentioned, Scott, we have Men's Warehouse is one of the brands in our portfolio, as is Joseph A. Bank. We also have a brand called K&G Fashion Superstore, which is based in the South in Atlanta and actually serves families. So menswear is the largest portion of the business, but we also sell ladies and children's clothing. And then we have a brand called Moores in Canada, which is quite similar to Men's Warehouse in terms of the products that we offer and sort of the overall experience, but still has its own kind of Canadian flair. And we're very much menswear specialty retailers. And my team is responsible for all of the marketing to all of our customers across all four brands.
So looking at your background, you've had a career spanning apparel, brand work, e-commerce, other things. Tell us about your career journey and maybe, what wouldn't we know from looking at your LinkedIn profile?
Probably the most unusual thing that's not really clear on my LinkedIn profile is I actually started my career in Japan. I lived in Japan for 3 years and learned the language to the extent that I was able to actually work for a market research firm in Japan. And so I literally had no experience in marketing or anything. And I think my only sort of redeeming quality for the role was that I spoke some Japanese and I spoke English. And we worked with clients across North America and Europe who were looking to understand the Japanese market. And so I worked with Campbell's Soup and Pepperidge Farms as they were looking to get more into the Japanese market. I worked with Unilever and IBM when they were doing all their global brand tracking. So it was an amazing way to really start to learn the art of marketing and the science of marketing, and got a really great experience with that. And then I moved back to Canada, worked for Unilever. So I got a good grounding in packaged goods as well, and got introduced to the internet when I was working for Labatt in Canada, and we launched beer.com in 1999, which was, probably
I remember
a grounding achievement.
Rocco Rossi and beer.com, right?
Rocco. Oh, that's amazing. And Rocco's a dear man. Yeah. So we, launched that. And then I finally thought, if I'm going to do this internet thing, I'll move down to the Bay Area. So that's how I got into e-commerce and spent a good chunk of time at eBay. And so then I actually had a consulting business for a while and had the great opportunity to work with a number of clients, large and small, across a number of industries. And I think that gave me a really good understanding of just the purity of marketing across. Doesn't really matter what industry you're in, if it's B2C, B2B. There's a lot of very common principles and a lot of things that we can all learn from tangential industries. As well, that I now use for what I'm doing today, which is great.
So do you identify as a brand marketer, as a digital leader, as a growth hacker, or some combination? How do you usually describe yourself?
Yeah, it's a good question, because I would have thought for a long time I was more of a brand marketer, especially with my grounding in packaged goods. But you can't be a successful marketer these days without a really strong grounding in growth and performance marketing as well. So I really look at myself now as an all-round athlete across all of that. And I think making sure that we really understand that interplay of how brand and performance work well together.
Shifting gears over to Tailored Brands. You sell a lot of formal wear, and I can only imagine the impact that the pandemic had on your business. And I'm interested how you got through that. I mean, it sounds like it was quite a challenge. There weren't people going to weddings and bar and bat mitzvahs and other things that you do where you wear formal wear.
That's exactly. And yeah, imagine a business where you're all about weddings and helping people dress for going to the office, and neither of those things were happening. So yeah, we made a couple of different shifts. One was we basically became an e-commerce business for a quarter when all of our stores were closed, like most other retailers. And so that was a huge adjustment, and it forced us to really accelerate some of the initiatives that we had around digital marketing and even just e-commerce as a result. So like a lot of people, we moved faster than we ever have on things like buy online, pick up in store, curbside pickup, that type of thing. But we also really accelerated the shift that we were already in the process of making, going from a very, very heavy TV offline base of marketing into a much more digital mix. So from a marketing standpoint, we made a ton of changes that way. We even made changes at the assortment level, though, in terms of the kinds of products and clothing that we carried. And we even, dabbled for a while in athleisure because that was what people were wearing on their Zoom calls. But I think what was really interesting too is seeing some of the sales trends at that time as we went through kind of folks starting to emerge from lockdown. We still saw a lot of shirts selling. We weren't selling a lot of pants. And then we did start selling a lot of pants because everybody's waistband size changed. The
COVID-15, as they called it, right?
Exactly. Well, although it was interesting, there was a stat, and I won't get the numbers right, but it was something like there was a large percentage of people who went up a size, but there were also a number of people who went down a size, as they, working out at home more and had more time to exercise and that kind of thing. So, but yeah, it was really a lesson in agility and being very responsive to what the customer was telling us they wanted at that time. And that went from everything from our assortment to our marketing mix to even just the way we messaged in our communication around, the things we were doing to keep customers safe as they did come into store to shop and that kind of thing.
Congrats on getting through that and all the acceleration. It's like it's a business that if you think about what would be most impacted, that's top on the list. But then on the other side of it, I'm sure I'm not alone in going to a lot of weddings this summer or since some of the COVID restrictions have been lifted. So you have, I would guess, like this influx of business going on. But I guess my question is, you've gone through all of this and you accelerated a lot on the digital side. You became an e-commerce business. Does it feel like a fundamentally different business than pre-pandemic?
Yes and no. And I think what's been interesting when you think of like kind of lessons learned through all of this is there are things we've learned a lot about how you need to be much more responsive and move to the customer as quickly as you can.
If you're enjoying this podcast, please be sure and hit that subscribe button on your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss another great episode. We'll be right back with Carolyn Pollock, CMO of Tailored Brands, right after this message. After 2 years of unprecedented growth, some think e-commerce has hit its peak. So what comes next? As businesses look to enter the next era of e-commerce growth, CommerceNext serves as a guide to get them there. Led by best-in-class technology providers across the commerce ecosystem, including Bloomreach, Miracle, Cinch, ShipBob, and Avalara, CommerceNext offers exclusive research, benchmarking, data, and more, empowering businesses to deliver a commerce experience that drives measurable revenue growth. Learn more at commerceexperience.com. That's commerceexperience.com.
But we've also learned that it's really important to stay true to who you are. So when we were dabbling in things like athleisure and that kind of thing, that might have been what the customer was looking for across the board, but that's not what they come to us for. And when we got back to our core of we really are for those special occasions and those moments that really matter most to you, where you really want to look your best and therefore feel your best, whether it's your wedding, it's a job interview, whatever it is. That's what we do well, and that's what our customers come to us for. So we kind of went back to that. And so I think in some ways, we've almost gone back to the company that we were before, but we're doing it in a much more data-driven way. We're doing it in a much more sort of customer-first, customer-centric approach than maybe we did before. But I think that was such a key takeaway that we had was fighting against what customers really like you for and trying to change their minds alongside that is a very difficult battle. And you can be in a much stronger position if you really stay true to your core.
So you might describe your company as, would you describe them as more agile now? I mean, after 2.5 years of this craziness, the pandemic, the COVID era, is that one of the key lessons learned? I mean, you just articulated one, which is, stay true to your knitting, so to speak, or stay true to the strategy is going to pay off for you. But as you and the team reflect back on the 2 years of the COVID era, what were the key lessons? I imagine in your category, there was already a movement towards more casualization of the office, for example. So some of these things were kind of already in motion. But as you look back again, is there something, as Scott said, something different about the way you approach things fundamentally, strategically, and structurally?
Well, I think, again, we all went through so much change, and it was like one thing, and then you changed to this, and then you had to change to this other thing. And, and that change can be exhausting. Right. And I think that also, change that's purposeful and is focused is, much better change and much more productive change than change that is reactive and, not really knowing what's going to happen next, which is unfortunately what we all were doing during COVID. And, it's because of all that, it's necessitated further change, but that change is needed to be much more focused and much more directed and much more kind of consistently on point to an end goal. So it's what a lot of us marketers try to do anyways, is we set our, big vision of where we want to be, and we keep kind of keeping our sights and focused on that. And you will have to change as you go towards that path. But keeping it much more focused, and on strategies is critical. And I think it's then easier to move teams through that change as well. So I think that's been something that we've really adjusted to in the last 18 months or so, as things have started to return to normal, is to stay focused on that. And, yes, you can start to layer things in as your capabilities get stronger, but you've got to kind of just stay focused on what your path is.
I want to pull on a couple of threads of some things you said earlier in our discussion. And I'm really intrigued, I think our listeners will be intrigued by this, and how you balance performance marketing and basically storytelling, right? So, as you look through your background, you've got, traditional, classic, great package of good stuff at Unilever, Labatt's, and then you've got eBay, responsive, direct, very much performance marketing oriented. How do you balance those two? When you go to hire for, the next social media role, are you looking for a storyteller or a performance marketer? How do you balance those two things, and how do you think through that?
I'm a big believer of the yes and I think it's you can't do good marketing these days without knowing the impact on the performance side, right? And how to deliver on that. But you also can't drive preference and brand loyalty without a really strong brand point of view, strong perception, strong values. So I think it's that combination. And, in looking for people, you're not always going to find everybody's going to be super balanced, across the board, right? It's you're looking for people who balance one another sometimes, right? I've got some people on the team who are just incredibly creative, and then I've got other people who are incredibly analytic, and they work fantastically together. And I love seeing those combinations together. In terms of how we approach things, I really believe that you can only, at the end of the day, we all just sort of optimize to the customer behavior only, and we don't have a strong story to tell. We're just all optimizing to the same people, and we're never going to you're not going to have a brand that stands out. And so you've got to have the content and the stories and the values that resonate with your customer, that ultimately are how you show up in those channels where you're going to optimize for the performance of it. So it really has to be the combination of the two. Testing too, how those, you can test messaging just as much as you can test, are you in the right channel, or do you have the right target audience, and that kind of thing. And so I think, understanding what really resonates with your customer, and then making sure that you're showing up in a performance-based channel that actually really works that way. So,
well, it's super interesting because, of course, the platforms themselves that we're talking about, beyond just email, not just email. I'm sure email is a vital part of what you do. But if you think about the evolution of the platforms, where it's a little harder, to get any kind of advantage by being an expert at any one of them, and then you also have new evolving platforms, whether it be TikTok or live streaming or any of these things. So, again, is that where we have less than certain less certainty around what is good in some of those platforms. So it's a little more storytelling, and again, stay true to the brand, and that'll be our North Star. And no matter what happens, we'll explore, but we'll always be going in the same direction. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I think that's totally right. I mean, yeah, there's some channels where it's super clear cut and you're going to get instant measurable feedback on things, and others where you throw something out there and you have no idea unless, like someone leaves a bad comment on a post somewhere or something. Right. But yeah, I think like it's just a lot of testing and trying different things. And I think it's that, you have your workhorse engine of performance that is going to really help drive a lot of the revenue, and is like usually lower funnel type of activity. Sure. And then you have that upper funnel stuff that, is maybe a little more creative, maybe pushes the boundaries a little bit more, still should have performance measures around it, where you can, but is going to be the stuff that will, eventually create the memories and leave more lasting impressions as well.
The Conversation with CommerceNext podcast, we like to talk about career advice. What's the best advice that you got? And as you move through your career, you've got such an incredible diverse background, so you can kind of cherry pick, so to speak, from different places to get insight. But is there some kind of kernel of central knowledge that drove your decisions and which way you were going?
Yeah, I mean, I would say a couple of things. So one, on the Japan thing, like it doesn't have to be Japan, but I always encourage folks who are coming out of college or at a point of transition, whether it's, just finishing a job and looking for the next thing, is like do something that gets you way out of your comfort zone, and that could be living somewhere where you don't speak the language and you can't even read the signs.
That's pretty far. That's pretty far.
You don't have to go that far. It could be like, you try a new hobby or something. But
is that why you wound up in Japan? Not to kind of dwell on that too much, but I mean that ticks a lot of those boxes, right? Yeah. So somewhere can't read, as you said, can't read the signs, don't know the language yet. That's at the far end of the spectrum. Was that a little bit of what was going through your head at the time?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was not ready to start a career. In fact, my degree was in genetics, so I knew I didn't want to go to med school, right. And because I would have passed out the minute we had to work with the cadaver. But I think that I just wanted to try something different and had a little bit of a spirit of adventure, and you don't have a lot to lose when you're 21 and you don't really have a lot of money and all that. It's just like you can go try something. So, and reflecting now on it is when I say get out of your comfort zone. I don't think I articulated it in that way in my head then, but I do think that's super important. And I think whether that's in your career, trying something new, taking on a new project even, or whatever, I think pushing yourself at times, and getting to a place where it's really quite uncomfortable is where you really start learning, good and bad, and kind of knowing that you're just going to take something good out of that. The other couple of things that I've been learned over the years that folks have shared with me and that I try to put into practice is valuing different perspectives. I think, I don't have a very traditional CMO's background, and I look at the folks on my team who are really thriving, and a lot of them come with very different perspectives as well. And I think there's real value in it. There's certainly value also in following the traditional path. But I think, knowing that you need that balance of voices and that balance of perspective, I think is super important. And the emphasis these days on diversity and inclusion and all that, I think only underscores that there's so much data out there now that says balanced boards and balanced leadership teams and executive committees and that kind of thing yield better business results. And I think that there's a reason that that's the case, and that it really is about the diversity of thought and what people with different backgrounds bring to the table. And then the other is really about seeking to understand. And I think that that's always a mantra that, always trying to understand what's behind somebody's action, what's behind a customer's action, what's behind, a teammate's action or a colleague or peer's actions, and really trying to understand that before rushing to just assuming that it's one particular thing or another. And maybe that comes partly too from starting my career in market research. But I think asking a lot of questions and really trying to understand what's behind a motivation really helps you be more responsive to it.
Now, as you traversed your career, did you have mentors, or did you have people that were your touchstone to guide you along that journey?
I've had a few. I've been really lucky. I've had a few who, folks that my Rocco Rossi was actually one of them. I think just, people that have a big impact in your life, whether it's an official kind of mentor relationship or not. I've been lucky to have a few of those. And I think that's always so helpful because again, it's another perspective, right? And it's another perspective that's balanced with a ton of experience and judgment that is really, that can be very useful for you.
Well, let's turn the lens kind of 180 degrees, so to speak, and now kind of get your advice for the next generation of marketers and digital leaders. What, as you think, as you hire, as you think forward, what are those attributes? You touched on a lot of them already, the kind of diversity, the analytical skills, the storytelling. Mm-hmm. It's hard to find all of these things all in one individual. But, what do you look for? Do you look for someone, for example, we've had guests who say, I look for someone who was a college athlete because I know they're coachable and they work super, super hard. Other people are looking for different things. Do you have a persona that you look for, or is it just kind of an open book for you and you kind of go with it as you meet the different people?
Honestly, a big part of it is like the conversation and the dialogue that you strike in on, like really the chemistry. Like, do you click with somebody? Do you feel like you can have a conversation with them and that, they're seeking to understand as much as I am and asking questions and engaged. And, when I look now at like all that we've gone through with my team and all that we have to accomplish, like, the fire in the belly and the positive outlook of like, yeah, this has been tough, but wow, we've learned a lot and we're going to just keep going. And, there's sort of like it's not naive optimism, but it's a balanced optimism that I think is a really important attribute because that as a marketer, at least you have to lead the organization with a place of growth and optimism. So that's one thing I think I look for. And then also just, someone who doesn't believe they've got all the answers. And, it goes back to, again, like asking more questions and that kind of thing, but that they don't always think like, show me your expertise for sure, but don't feel like I'm expecting you to have every single answer because no one does, right?
So kind of understand pretty quickly the technical skills and then move on from there. I was talking with an interview with Dan Pink, great author and great thinker about people. And I said, what's the one question we should be asking people in interviews? And he said, ask them if they think they're lucky. You'll learn more about their perspective, about who they are than, sometimes when they answer that question. Now, you have more stake than many in the next question I have, which is where we work, right? Working in the office versus working at home. So for an organization like yours, it's more than an academic question because you both have business interests tied up in where people are going to work and how they're going to work. But let's start with how your organization is adapted to the work from home or work anywhere. Was that something you were doing pre-pandemic? Was that culturally accepted within your organization? Has that changed? Where do you sit today?
Yeah, well, we're a little unique, I guess, because we've got offices around the country. So we've got an office here in California, we have one in Houston, and we have one in New York. So we've always had a little bit of that muscle of working remotely. Most people worked in one of those offices, but we have had people also who didn't. And obviously we became a lot more open to that through the pandemic. And, as we've hired people, a number of our leaders live in locations around the country that aren't where the offices are. And so we just travel a lot to get together. But we weren't in a regular muscle of like being remote. And I think we've also found that we're now back in the office. The majority of us are in the office Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And while it was hard, and, I talked to the team about it's almost like a muscle that's atrophied and you've got to build it back up. And, once you build it up, then it's super strong and you can really handle things, but it takes a little while and it can be kind of painful at first to build it up. And that was it. Like our muscle of working in person together in the office had atrophied. And so it was a little tricky at first to get everybody to really see the benefit of it. But, we work with merchants who need to be with their products, with their shirts and suits and pants and sweaters and everything else. And we work closely with them and we need to be around that product. And, just the shorthand conversation that happens by being in person, the efficiencies that we've gotten from that and the speed at which we're able to operate is definitely notable. So I think we're big believers in the value of that in-person connection, but again, having that balance. And so you have the Mondays and Fridays at home, which is still phenomenal and a wonderful thing. That means you can kind of be anywhere from Friday to Monday.
That's going to stick. Is that going to stick in the organization?
I think it is. Yeah, I think like a lot of people see the benefit of that, and certainly, the people are back to the office if the traffic here in the Bay Area is any indication. And but I think people enjoy not having to commute 5 days a week and only doing it 3.
Last question on that: do you envision more offsites or more other ways to connect with the team other than in the 4, 8, or 16 walls of different offices? In other words, I've talked to retailers who say, maybe we think very unconventionally about this because we've got, particularly in IT, people working all over the country, but we need to get them together, and maybe the office isn't the place where we get together. And everybody's trying to think through that. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, we're still figuring it out too. I mean, it's pretty clear that like community builds best around food. So we're trying to find ways where we can center activities around food, and whether that's events that we tie to something with that, or whether it's, creating places in our office where people can gather to eat and, there's food available and that kind of thing. I think that, there's a real value in that, both on sort of the day-to-day as well as when you do kind of more special gatherings. We're still trying to figure that out, like everybody else is right now, as to like what all those things need to be. And when you have such a disparate workforce, like, does it make sense to fly everybody in for certain times? I try to get my team together quarterly at this point, so that we have those opportunities to meet in person. So it's important.
So enjoyable for me to hear this conversation, especially your background and the path that you took to where you are. I think it is such an important lesson for, people that maybe are even in college now, or certainly if they're earlier in their careers, that, you had a degree in genetics and you went to Japan. I think so many people early in their careers have this one goal in mind, and they're just, with blinders on, working towards it. And I really appreciate hearing you talk about how you allowed your curiosity and your seeking to understand to really drive you and kind of allow your path to move around a little bit. So I think that's a really important lesson I hope people take away from this. In terms of just wrapping things up, we want you to look ahead a little bit. So we've been talking about marketing quite a bit, and this balance between performance and brand marketing, and the importance of creatives versus the analytics people, and so on. But if you were to look into your crystal ball for 5 years, it's 2027, and you're thinking about the CMO that is sitting in your seat now, how is that role going to be different? Is there a different skill set? Is it more people in genetics? Is it, what do you think it's going to be?
It's fascinating, right? When you think of, I don't know, even compared to 20 years ago, the diversification of media options, even within which to market. And, we were talking about the other day, if SEO and all that has been about helping people find and discover things on the web, search in general, how are people going to discover things in the metaverse, right? And then there's multiple locations for that. And are you just going to show up in the metaverse and then hope you find the things that are interesting to you as a customer or a consumer? And so I think it's going to get even more challenging for the CMO to navigate the fact that you'll probably have some people still watching TV, and then you're going to have other customers who are going to be in a completely different environment that you need to reach in a meaningful way to them. So I think it's going to, the CMO is going to need to continue to be extremely creative, but agile and open to trying different things and testing and just being very sort of nimble, moving through all these different media and ways in which to connect as a brand with their customers. So it's, I hope I'm still around working on that at that point, because it's going to be really cool.
Well, Caroline, it's been such a treat listening to your background. I mean, it's really a great discussion of the art and science of marketing put together. So, and understanding and listening a bit of your career journey, bringing in learnings from all kinds of different places and pulling them all together. Thanks so much for joining us on Conversations with CommerceNext.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning into this special episode of The Voice of Retail. If you haven't already, be sure and click and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so new episodes will land automatically twice a week. And check out my other retail industry media properties, the Remarkable Retail Podcast, Conversations with CommerceNext podcast, and the Food Professor podcast with Dr. Sylvain Charlebois. Last but not least, if you're into barbecue, check out my all-new YouTube barbecue show, Last Request Barbecue, with new episodes each and every week. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc, president of M.E. LeBlanc Company and Maven Media. And if you're looking for more content or want to chat, follow me on LinkedIn or visit my website at meleblanc.co. Have a safe week, everyone.